This project was released as part of the project InclusiveGameLab, which was funded by the German Ministry of Research, Technology and Space, and realized by the University of Applied Sciences Cologne and the Department for Youth Media Culture. Today we have a look at the history of accessible games. While accessibility has only become a specialized field in recent years, developers actually started considering unintentional barriers and how to remove them in the early days of digital gaming. In fact, the earliest example is probably Bertie the Brain, being one of the first video games ever and invented by Joseph Cates. It was created to showcase an electron tube at the 1950 Canadian National Exhibition. Visitors of the exhibition could play tic-tac-toe against an artificial intelligence and adjust the difficulty level of the game, which was and still is an important accessibility feature. Other than that, there were very few early accessibility considerations on the software level. But it should be noted that games were much simpler back then, both in terms of inputs and audiovisual presentation, so many proved naturally accessible, at least for some players with impairments. Atari's Pong 1972, for example, only used a simple pedal controller, very simple, high contrast graphics, and did not rely on sound alone to convey information. In addition, the gameplay was easy to understand, with the official instructions simply asking players to avoid missing a ball for high score. In 1974, Atari released another game following a key rule of game accessibility. Touch Me did not rely on a single mode of output, but instead used both audio and visuals to convey information. In 1980, 30 years after Bertie was introduced to the world, a company named Brilliant Computing released a selection of accessible games. Their adaptations of arcade hits like Space Invaders and Pong offered options for slowing down gameplay and supported many accessible controllers. 1984 saw the release of the very first screen reader, Macintalk. It was pre-installed on the Macintosh operating system, which means it improved accessibility in more than one way. Not only did it remove barriers for people with visual impairments, but because it was delivered with the operating system, users didn't have to search for third-party software and invest additional money. In 1988, another company decided to publish a piece of accessible software as part of the bundle. Q-Sound released Bumpus, which is considered to be one of the first audio games, with their sound cards. The game used 3D sound and tasked players with fighting a dangerous creature whose movements were only audible, not visible. And finally, in 1989, Nintendo released the first ever adaptive controller. It worked with the NES control and used a sip and puff system for controls. To learn more about this fascinating piece of technology, check out our talk on assistive technology. Almost 10 years later, in 1997, one of the first commercial audio games was released. Kenji Eno's Real Sound Case No Regret was published by Sega for their Saturn console and later ported to the Dreamcast. Notably, Real Sound was developed with blind players in mind. Through fan letters and conversations with players, Kenji Eno learned that visually impaired people were very interested in action games, but encountered barriers when trying to access them. So he set out to create something both visually impaired and sighted players could enjoy. Another milestone in the 90s was the introduction of optional subtitles. The very first mainstream game to feature both subtitles and captions was Zork, Grand Inquisitor, which was released in 1997, the same year as Real Sound. However, subtitles became a standard feature in games much later. Accessibility options and dedicated games for players with disabilities slowly became more common, but games as a whole actually were increasingly inaccessible due to their complexity, both in terms of audiovisual presentation and also gameplay. So game accessibility advocacy and dedicated efforts to remove access barriers became even more important. A major event for the effort to promote accessibility in gaming was the founding of the International Game Developers Association Game Accessibility Special Interest Group in 2003. Its founder Thomas Westin also co-developed Terraformers 2003, a 3D action adventure which used a highly innovative sound interface with spatial sound and information added through voiceovers to help the player navigate the environment. In addition, the game used sonar to indicate distance between player and objects, as well as a GPS system that made the exact position of all objects available through audio. Every single object in the game, including items, was sonified and identifiable by their unique sounds. In 2004, the Game Accessibility Special Interest Group released a report on the current state of game accessibility, which also included a number of general guidelines which were later updated. Also in 2004, the US-based non-profit organization Able Gamers was founded to improve game accessibility through advocacy, advanced training for game developers, and by equipping disabled players with accessible hardware free of charge, among other things. It operates to this day, but faced allegations in 2025 regarding mismanagement and discrimination against employees. 3 years later, another charity which is still active was founded, this time in the UK. Focusing on players with motor impairments, Special Effects works with developers to help make their games more accessible and create specialized control setups. They also offer free resources on their Game Access and DevKit websites, and free assessment to help players with impairments find a gaming setup that works for them. Subsequently, more accessibility options were introduced and the industry began exploring options like adjustable game speed or high contrast modes. FIFA 2010 had, as the first game of the series, optional simplified controls and could be played with just one stick and 2 buttons, making it much more accessible for players with motor impairments and cognitive impairments. In 2010, the IGDA Game Accessibility Special Interest Group launched their website with a resource section highlighting research and best practices. 2012 saw the launch of GameAccessibilityGuidelines.com and Able Gamers, Inclusification Guidelines. These two were the first resources to be shared and used widely among game developers. So they played a key role in promoting the development of game accessibility as we know it today. From this point onward, even more projects introduced accessibility considerations, many of which were inspired by these guidelines. Major AAA games like Destiny and Uncharted 4 offered a range of accessibility features, for example, colorblind modes, camera assist, and alternative input options for repeated button presses. From this point on, milestones were reached more and more frequently, and accessibility-related topics received increasing attention in the industry, game studies, and game journalism. So at the end of this talk, we'll focus on just a few major events that had a particularly strong impact, starting with the first edition of the very first industry event focusing solely on accessibility, the GA-Conf, or Game Accessibility Conference. It's a biannual event taking place in alternation in the US and Europe. Since the kickoff in 2017, it has continuously offered in-depth explorations of the topic from industry professionals and advocates. In 2018, one of the first websites focusing specifically on game accessibility reviews went live. Can I Play That publishes articles written by gamers with impairments who share detailed assessments of individual games' accessibility with varying focus, motor, vision, audio, or cognitive accessibility, depending on the reviewer's personal and professional experience. In addition, CAPD publishes games and industry news on a regular basis and has developed several comprehensive guides for game developers. After the publication of an exposé in 2024, which uncovered that one of the site's supposed founders was a false persona, the previous editor-in-chief was dismissed and editorial responsibilities were transferred to a new team. Shortly after, Game Accessibility Nexus, another dedicated to games journalism and accessibility, was founded. Just like Can I Play That, Game Accessibility Nexus publishes detailed reviews written by gamers with impairments. Reviews are sorted into three main categories: mobility, deaf and hard of hearing, blind and low vision, to make it easier for readers to find information relevant for them. By 2019, accessibility had become such an important topic in the industry that most prominent AAA games had some form of accommodation. But in 2020, one studio set the bar much higher. With the second entry in its The Last of Us series, Naughty Dog published the game with the most accessibility options to date, offering more than 60 settings players could use to adapt the game to their needs. The Last of Us Part 2 is still considered to be the best practice example and inspired many other studios to follow suit. Also in 2020, a new initiative set out to promote accessibility and inclusion in the game space, this time in Germany, Gaming ohne Grenzen, Gaming Without Barriers, realized by the Department for Youth Media Culture, fjmk, based in Cologne, which organized playtest groups with disabled and able-bodied players, developed resources for media educators, and shared their research findings with the public to raise awareness for the importance of accessible gaming. In 2024, Gamescom, the world's largest gaming trade show, was the first to introduce mandatory accessibility regulations as well as additional recommendations for exhibitors. From the 2024 event onwards, all exhibitors are required to provide a step-free access to booth spaces and encouraged to provide 8 adjustable gaming terminals, sufficient space for wheelchair of all sizes, and separate queues for wheelchair users, among other things. Towards the end of 2024, game developer and publisher Electronic Arts added 23 new tools to its Patent Pledge, a company initiative originally launched in 2021. By sharing tools such as the photosensitivity analysis plugin Iris and personalized speech recognition technology royalty-free, EA helps developers improve the accessibility of their own games. At the same time, the first online network for the German-speaking world, Netzwerk Barrierefreies Gaming, was launched by the Department for Youth Media Culture and the University of Applied Sciences Cologne as part of their state-funded InclusiveGameLab project. In early 2025, the Entertainment Software Association launched its Accessible Games Initiative. In a cross-company collaboration with Electronic Arts, Google, Microsoft, Sony Interactive Entertainment, and other industry leaders. The ESA's project aims to provide players with clear and concise information about accessibility features available in games through tags that game developers can use across digital storefronts. Another approach to help players with impairments find suitable games was introduced by game technology company Good Trouble in 2025. Able to Play, a so-called games discovery platform, matches gamers to games with personalized accessibility scores. Players can add information about their accessibility needs to a profile by checking boxes in predefined categories, and an automated system checks the database for titles matching this criteria. After several years of internal use, French game studio and publisher Ubisoft made its colorblindness simulation tool Chroma available for public use. Developed by the company's quality control team in Indy, this open source software provides feedback in real time, meaning that developers can check the colorblindness accessibility of their game while controlling it. It needs to be said that despite these major steps in the right direction, gaming is still widely inaccessible for many players, but game developers and publishers are increasingly aware of this problem and put a lot of creativity into removing unintentional barriers, not just on the software level, but also by creating more accessible hardware. To learn more about this topic, check out our talk, Introduction to Assistive Technology. These are some sources and links for further reading.